working. Good morning, everybody. Morning. So many people woke up for the 10 a.m. keynote. Well done, guys. So we're here to talk to you about Mind Minds. I'm Amanda Laucher, and I've met a whole lot of you before. This is my fourth build stuff. I normally talk about things like F# and programming languages and type systems and graph databases and that sort of thing. But today we're going to talk about something that is extremely near and dear to my heart. My company, can I say that? Co-founder of the company, Mind Minds. And this is my brother Marvin.
Good morning. I am Marvin Laucher. I've been coding for a little over 2 years, so still relatively new. And before that, and this is my first Build Stuff conference. It's been absolutely great. And before coding, I was a coal miner. So.
Cool. So Build Stuff is probably Mind Mind's favorite conference for a whole lot of reasons, but the #1 reason is that 4 years ago at this conference, I met my partner, Jonathan Graham, the other co-founder of Mind Minds. And so without the Build Stuff conference, Mind Minds wouldn't exist. So the entire company, everybody within our organization, owes a debt of gratitude. So thanks very much, Build Stuff. Okay, so what's Mind Minds? I promise not to show you a lot of markety slides, but this is kind of a markety slide. Mind Minds is a staged approach, a staged program to get people who are transitioning careers into software. We are focused on transitioning coal miners and coal mining communities into a new economy, the tech economy. And we have a program that allows us to do that. We start with a 16-week boot camp plus a 16-week apprenticeship, or pre-apprenticeship. We then move people into an apprenticeship program and then into a full-time salaried position. This is the area in which I grew up. Actually, this little corner of Pennsylvania called Greene County. I think I got it there. This is Appalachia. This is an area in the United States that is very heavily dependent on coal. Coal mining has run the economy in this area for a very long time.
As you can, I don't know if you can tell the colors, but as you can see, the darker colors are the most affected areas, and it's 32 to 94% of the coal jobs have been lost from 2011 to last year, 2016.
These coal mining jobs are going away because of things like wanting to save our planet. Because we realize the negative effects of coal mining on the planet, there have been lots of regulations towards moving away from coal mining, which is kind of a double-edged sword. Nobody says that, right? It's great to move away from coal. There are cleaner energy forms, and we need to be investing in them. However, we have a bit of a problem that just snapping our fingers and saying we're going to regulate away this problem and there'll be no more coal means that there's a whole lot of people left out of jobs, a whole lot of people who are affected negatively, and entire communities which just vanish into ghost towns because there's nothing left for the residents to do for a living.
For every one coal mining job that's lost, that affects 5 other jobs, supply chain. So, I mean, this is a huge deal. It's not just the coal miners and their families, it's the whole community.
So there are less tax dollars. As less people are earning the coal mining income, there's less tax dollars to go into the community. So schools get less funding, and teachers are laid off, and our children suffer. That's not a fire alarm, is it? So at the same time that we have this problem with the coal mines going bankrupt and laying off all of their employees, we have another problem in the US, which is the lack of people with technology skills. This is kind of a good problem for us, right? We at Build Stuff, we're technologists. We're trying to solve the problem of creating more people who understand how to write great code. And so we all recognize that this problem exists. It's hard to hire people. It's hard to find people who have skills that we can afford. I assume if it's a fire alarm, somebody will say, get off the stage. So at the same time, we've got a new president in the United States who is making regulations, things like We don't want to have external people coming in and stealing our jobs. Well, I did just kind of say that we don't have enough people with skills, but we're no longer going to allow foreign people in to help us write our code. So this can be really, really bad, because it means that some of the diversity that we were getting because foreign workers were coming in and helping us think in more diverse fashion to help us write our code are no longer allowed in our country. So this is horrifying. It just means that we end up with more people who are thinking exactly the same. So a few years back, you guys might recognize this guy, Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook founder. He says, okay, I understand there's a problem with the coal mines. They're laying off. How about you send them to California and we'll teach them how to code? And that was quickly responded to by Michael Bloomberg, who said, you can't just teach a coal miner to code. So, Marva, how did it make you feel when you heard that Michael Bloomberg thinks you can't teach a coal miner to write code?
That's a very common thing, at least in the States. Everyone thinks the coal miners are just, uneducated. They're, the mines are so much different than what people really know they are. It's not, it's no longer, the picks and the shovels. Everything on the ground is very high tech, which I don't want to get into too much of the actual mining, but we have a longwall. If anyone's heard of a longwall before, basically it's 2,500 feet of this gigantic shear that cuts the coal face, and we have shields that support the roof. Everything's programmed. As you move, the shield's moving behind you. Every piece of equipment is.
So when I hear Marvin talk about working in the coal mine, it's probably how he used to feel when I would talk about coding. He has a whole language that's completely different than a language that I was familiar with. And interestingly enough, there's another company located in Kentucky that has done something similar. They've taken coal miners and taught them how to write code, and they now run a company called BitSource. A really great group. They invited an astronaut to come and visit them and go into the mine. And the astronaut came out of the mine and said, oh my goodness, this is fantastic. The equipment that you're using in the mine is the exact same equipment that I'm using in space, which is pretty cool. I bet Bloomberg didn't know that.
This is a continuous miner. Basically, you'll see the large, gigantic head on the front that rips the coal out. This was my former office. I stood 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And
a little bit different than your current office?
Yes, absolutely.
So one machine moves 60,000 tons per day. This is one of the machines that operates. This is, from what I'm told, it's kind of the one that doesn't do very much.
This is very small. This sets up the longwall. Basically, you have to mine out your entries for your longwall. And then it's literally probably 50 times that.
So just to kind of put this in perspective, powering one light bulb 24/7 for a year requires 325 kilograms of coal. That's a third a ton per light bulb. How many tons of coal are we using right now? When you start to put that into perspective, it really makes you question what you're doing in your home. To put that into perspective, that's about the size of 3 black bears. So it's quite a lot. Okay, so we're talking about some really big problems here. We're talking about not having enough people with technology skills, and we're talking about not having enough jobs for people who are being laid off from the coal mine. These are really, really big problems. Okay, so we're software developers. What do we do when we have big problems? We make them smaller? A splitter. We start to break it down into epics and stories and then tasks. My partner and I, both being software developers, this was kind of a natural for us. This is how we started to think about the problem. Our original goal was one person. That guy. We were at a holiday party at my mother's house. Jonathan and I were in from Chicago, and Marvin started having a conversation. He was going to be called into a meeting that following Monday. And I said, okay, no big deal, go to your meeting. He says, no, I think I'm probably gonna be laid off. All of my friends have been laid off, and I'm pretty sure I'm next. And I don't really know what's next for me. So that's when Jonathan and I got to talking and said, okay, well, maybe we could do something to help. What other things can Marvin do?
Yeah, so I made it through several rounds of layoffs, but it got worse and worse, for the mines. But for me, it was great. I mean, if you could take somebody out of a dark hole in the ground, and have it to be here today, have something like this. I worked for a company called Energy, and right before I left, it was almost 500 people were chopped. Go to work and gone, no more work.
To put that into perspective, we live in a town with 4,000 people.
Yep.
That's a very significant impact. And if we think back to the one coal mine job lost means 5 other jobs negatively impacted, yep. This is hugely impactful for our small community. So this is Pennsylvania. This is the little corner which we live. These are some guys who are working in the coal mine, kind of in the heyday, who, when Consul laid off, the United Mine Workers of America, which is the union, got together and they did a march through the town. And to have 4,000 people in the town and then that's the march is a pretty big deal.
Hang on. So when I said the long wall, the top picture up here, the shields is what's over your head. That is all programmed. Somebody had to code that tech. So as you move, the shields follow you.
Okay, so we have an epic. As an at-risk coal miner, I'd like to transition to a new career so that I can support my family.
Absolutely.
So I started to think, if Marvin loses his job, there are a few options. How can I help? There are other jobs in the region that will pay his bills, perhaps. There's a McDonald's. He could be a truck driver. Actually, that was his first response when I asked him what he'd do next. He said, well, truck driving actually could be the only thing in the area that could pay my bills.
Yes, but the bad thing with that, with technology, within the next 10 years or so, the trucks are going to be automated as well. So there's your CDL drivers. And when this mine started laying off, that was what most of the men jumped on, was CDL. So do I want to start something that in 10 years I could be out of a job again? So, and then your fast food. And none of these would even pay remotely close to what the coal mines paid.
And so, of course, my first thought was, well, just go become a programmer. I can't hire them to save my life. I really need somebody with these skills. Why don't you go do that?
Well, I always assumed that you had to have a university, you had to have a college degree to code. And even with that, with 3 kids and a wife at college and the money and, being laid off, who has the money for school? So
that's when we founded Mind Minds. We're a not-for-profit organization with the goal of creating tech hubs in rural areas that have had negative economic impact. In our region, it's because of coal and gas. But the reason we're on the stage here today is because we have an expectation that it's not just a coal problem. It's not just a problem that exists in my region. It's probably a problem that each of you knows somebody who lives in an area where there aren't a lot of opportunities. There isn't a lot of next step if they're laid off. They're doing the job that they're doing not because they love it, but because it's the only job that exists for them to do to pay their bills. So what we're hoping you might take away from this is some thoughts on how you might be able to use your skills, use the technology that you are happy with, the job that you hopefully love, and provide some skills to other people who might benefit as well. So how do we define success? We don't know when we get started if we've had any impact, right? Like, it's really hard to say, how will I know I've been successful? Are we successful because Marvin has a job? To a degree, absolutely. But also, there are other things that we want to accomplish. We said we wanted graduates from our training to have no debt. It's amazing how few people who are on the brink of being laid off want to pay you $20,000 for your boot camp. Or any money, right? You don't want to ask people who are already in a bad situation to give you money. You want to provide them with the ability to earn more money without putting them in debt. And we wanted them to be able to gain employment in the industry. Okay, so what? You go through this boot camp, and then what? If there's no next step, then we fail. And we wanted them to have a sustainable career. So essentially, we didn't want to teach all of these people some framework skill that means they'll have a job for a year or 2 years or 5 years, and then they'd be back in the same position. We wanted to give real fundamental skills that would transition between frameworks and across languages. So we thought going into this that it must be easier to learn as part of a group. Learning alone is hard. There's so much great material out there. If somebody wants to learn to write code, there's probably some of you thinking right now, if you want to learn to write code, there's a ton of stuff, just go do it. But having the guidance to know what to learn first, kind of what rabbit holes to fall down, that helps out quite a lot. And having other people who are at the same level as you or at a similar level who are also trying to bounce ideas off of you and figure things out together is really helpful. So we have a story.
Yeah, so as a new training program, I would like to recruit several people who are willing to take a risk and have potential for success, so that it's easier for each individual to learn.
Okay, so we ran a test. We said, can we recruit people by just putting an ad out on Facebook? Not even an ad, it was just a post. Hey, if I do this, would anybody come? And we got some people saying they'd be interested. And we also put an ad out in the newspaper that said, hey, we're going to be running this free training. If anybody's interested, we'll give you more details. Just meet us at this place at this time. And it worked. There were enough people interested. We had 10 people join the program. When Marvin decided he was going to do it, my sister Heather said, hey, if Marvin can do it, I can do it. Let's figure this out. And we had a very diverse group of people who all showed up to the same room. And every weekend and on Thursday evenings, we got together so that they could learn how to write software.
Yeah, so when we started, we wanted to gauge, they tell us, well, how do you know you'll be good at code? I said, well, the hardest thing about coding is breaking down the problem, right? If you can break it down and then move from there, it's a lot easier to conquer the project or the code. So we've started with Sonic Pi with the laundry cycle, right? If you can break down the process of doing laundry, I mean, how hard can it be? You put them in the washer, throw them in the dryer, they're done. But there's so much more to it. Do they need washed? Do you need the stain treat? Do we need to hang dry them? I mean, the water temperatures, the dryer cycles. There's a lot that goes into a simple laundry cycle. So if you can actually break the process down, it's, at least for me anyway, that's what coding is. You break it down and you solve each piece.
So it's amazing what you learn from how somebody breaks down the problem of doing laundry. Do they think with iterations? Do they think with conditionals? Are they already thinking with the right sort of concepts that we'll be able to translate that into working code? And it turns out that this is actually a pretty good test to see if somebody's going to be able to, at this point in time, learn how to write software. So we have another story. As a training program, I'd like to have a very inexpensive place for people to learn together so that people can easily collaborate. So this goes right along with not wanting to have one person that we're training, because training one person isn't going to be as beneficial as getting a group together. Having people in the same room is something that we find absolutely necessary. And so in addition to that, nobody's paying us, right? We're just doing this. We want to help people, and we're not trying to spend a ton of money in order to have a big impact. So we needed it to be very inexpensive.
So this is a fire department. I ran with EMS in the fire department, and luckily enough, I brought up to a meeting that, if we could use the space, I told them the cause, and they said, sure.
So free space in a community building that has Wi-Fi. That's what we needed. This test passed for a little while. It was really nice that every other weekend, or on the weekends and then some evenings, people could get together. However, this is also where everybody in town books their wedding. When you get married in a small town in Pennsylvania or in Appalachia, you're probably getting married in a fire hall. So people are paying money so that they can use this space, which means that they're not going to allow us to have our coding class during a wedding. So it was not fully stable. So what we did at a certain point when we had enough money and time to do so, we bought a space that we could use as an office. Actually, Jonathan and I bought a house. There was a carriage house with a 17-car garage that we completely renovated and made an office space. And this allows us to collaborate every day on our own schedule. So this is a quote that I stole from Dean Wampler. I'm not sure where he stole it from, so I didn't credit anybody. Maybe he made it up himself. Learn the fundamentals, the rest will change anyway. So this goes back to not wanting to teach to a specific framework. Teaching, for instance, Rails at a boot camp can be really beneficial to find a job right now. However, I find that it's more difficult to teach some of the underlying magic or some of the stuff that seems like magic. We really wanted all of our graduates to understand that underlying stuff so that when they're put in charge of using a framework, they'll be able to understand what's going on underneath the hood. So we tried to stay very lightweight.
Story. As a trainee, I would like to gain sustainable skills so that I can start a new career and not be in the same place 5 years from now.
So we do this using project-based learning. We use code katas, which hopefully you're all familiar with. If you're not, go Google code kata and become familiar. These are small projects that allow you to use coding techniques, different coding techniques, to solve the same problem over and over and over. It gives you joint context. Everybody in the group becomes familiar with the problem domain, and there are many solutions to those. So everything we do is project-based.
Yes, so FizzBuzz. Everybody's heard of FizzBuzz, right? We did FizzBuzz, CoinChanger, ISBN. There's so many out there. Tic-tac-toe. Who would have thought there's so much logic to an unbeatable tic-tac-toe?
When we started giving these projects, everybody thought we were crazy. We said, okay, let's do FizzBuzz. And the questions that they're asking are like, this is not applicable. This is not going to be what I do day to day. But you would be amazed how many programmers I've interviewed who can't actually do it. So it actually giving them the skills to be able to write some of these katas in different ways is really beneficial. And that seems to work. We also wanted to teach the agile process or agile processes. Agile thought processes, I think, is a better way to say it. Iterative development, the idea that you can fail a lot over and over and over until you find success. So we start right off the bat by doing pair programming, iterative development. We force a lot of the skills on them that they didn't realize that they had to learn the hard way. How many of you came up through the waterfall world? Every year that number gets less and less, which is really cool. And teamwork. We start with the premise that you are not individually responsible for anything. You work with a pair. You work with the mob. You're working with a team of people who are jointly responsible. And this really helps to take the edge off when somebody's trying to learn something new. If you're coming into this alone, think about how high school education and undergrad education are currently. Not very project-based, not very team-oriented. In fact, often we grade along a curve in class, meaning that I'm in direct competition with everybody else in the room. And that's really hard. That is not how we write software. That doesn't work. So we teach people right off the bat how to work together as teams. And this is our stack. A lot of people ask, okay, well, if you want to teach people to write software, what are you going to teach them? It's 2017. There's a million languages. What are you going to teach them? And so we start with a really flexible stack. We start with Ruby without Rails. We don't teach Rails. We teach how to write Ruby in an object-oriented fashion, and we teach how to write Ruby in a functional fashion. So we write really bad Ruby sometimes, not idiomatic Ruby, but we teach the paradigm. We teach the way to think. We also teach SQL, which I think is kind of contentious topic, right, with NoSQL. We teach SQL because we think so many businesses are using this. We want people to have exposure to databases so that they know they have at least some taste when they get to a work environment of what it means to interact with a data store. We also teach HTML, CSS, JavaScript, the web stack, and a bit of Node as well sometimes.
Yes. And
then everything is deployed in AWS because we see managing servers as kind of tangential. It's 2017, almost everything is deployed to a cloud somewhere.
Yeah, so the test, okay with failure. Everyone knows you'll fail 1,000,000 times before you finally get the success. So if you're comfortable with failing, it'd be great code. Over and over.
The people who have the hardest time in a program are the people who come in having made straight A's their entire educational career and having always been successful. People who are good at everything are terrible at coding. I'm not sure if that's always, but it seems to be with our group. So having failed at some point in your life really sets you up in a positive direction, that you can pick yourself back up, keep trying, keep failing, keep failing, keep failing, keep failing. Success! Okay, so we had a hypothesis that if somebody has a GitHub portfolio, they'll be able to get a job. Interviews are really common, right? You're going to have to do an interview. However, I think that there are a lot of companies who will hire you based on the fact that you can actually write code, and proving that you can do so by having code in your repo. So we have a story. As a trainee, I would like to show potential employers what I have learned so they will consider hiring me. I think something else a little bit contentious about what we do is we commit to GitHub day one. You know that terrible stuff you have to do to use GitHub? Before you learn how to write code, how much harder is that? It's so much easier until you've written code and had to put it in some other source code repository that was really, really easy. And Git is kind of hard. There's some hard things that you have to grasp. But if you've never learned anything else, it's actually pretty easy. And we never see anybody having trouble with this, which is great. So what are we putting in our repos? Marv kind of already talked about, we're putting some of the projects, putting all of the projects that we do during the training, but then we also do community projects. We write code towards the end of the boot camp, and we give it to a not-for-profit organization or some organization that wouldn't have been able to afford code otherwise. So some examples of groups that we've written community projects for.
Yeah, so we did the community service for the town, for Waynesburg.
Yes, so if somebody breaks a law, sometimes you don't have to send them to jail right away. You can give them community service hours, community service projects. And to manage that, there's a system in place to do it that our students wrote, which is pretty fantastic.
Yes, the mentor-mentee app. What else do we have? The nonprofit, the
Teddy Bear Care.
Teddy Bear Care, yes, which is a nonprofit animal rescue shelter site.
Yeah, so currently we have a group that's writing a site to help manage people adopting animals that have been abandoned or abused. And giving code to these organizations, giving software to these organizations does a couple of things. One, locally there's not a lot of software developers, right? There's not a lot of technology. We're a little bit backwards in our technology stacks. So showing customers, showing companies what it's like to actually have to own and maintain code and what it can do for them and how it can change their business is really impactful. Plus, it feels so great as a student and as the organization to say, hey, we were able to do something for another organization, giving back to the community while we're still learning ourselves. So what's after a boot camp? This is always the hard part. A boot camp is of no value if it doesn't get you jobs. Boot camps are quick train programs that should give you skills to get jobs. And if there's no job at the end of the tunnel, that can be a real problem. So if you live in a major city in the US or most of the world, there are a ton of companies who have adopted the boot camp model and said, okay, well, we can hire out of university, or we can look at people who have changed careers perhaps, had some professional experience and then decided, I want to become a software developer. Or maybe who've had no professional experience and said, this is really what I want to do, but I don't feel like university is the right environment for me to learn it. So all of these companies hire bootcamp grads. But we don't live in a major city. We live here. This is more what the landscape looks like, which is kind of a problem. When we first started teaching the first cohort, I kind of thought everybody moved to the city. I don't know why, I'm super naive. I love the city. I love living in the city. So I said, hey, Marv, want to move to Chicago? And he said no.
Well, with the family, it's hard to just uproot, and so generally people want to stay, close to home.
Yeah, he's got kids in school, he's a part of the fire department, he's got a life there. He's not going to just move his whole life. So super naive, kind of ridiculous. Lesson learned. Okay, so Marv doesn't want to move to a city. What does the area in which he currently lives, what does that have to offer employers? Well, one thing, cost of living is so much less. You can see here that living in Waynesburg, $47,047 is the equivalent of San Francisco $150,000. So the cost of living difference alone is quite great. You don't actually have to make $150,000 to have a great life in Waynesburg or in Clendenin, West Virginia, where our Clendenin office is. And so I always talk about costs and numbers, and Marv says, well, I don't care about the cost of living. That's not why I'm here. I love living here.
No, absolutely.
So quality of life is just as important as cost of living. Okay, so we have a new epic. Given a community has a group of skilled software developers, it can attract work to employ them. All right, so if you build it, they will come. If we make a bunch of software developers, companies and employers will come to us. But that has to start somewhere. This started with me not being able to sleep at night, thinking I was ripping off my brother and my sister, taking their time, giving them skills, but having no end result, and to 8 other people. So this was kind of horrifying. So we accidentally started a consultancy. We decided that working with our network of contacts, we could find enough people who'd be willing to take the risk to allow our students, our graduates, to write software for them. We charge them really rational prices, and we back up the work that they're doing. We're there as they're doing it, and we are saying we'll put our name on it. So because we have a reputation in the industry, we thought we could take the risk to do this. And then hopefully, after we give them some experience, they can go off and work for somebody else. That's the goal. So we have a news story, kind of, if you can consider starting a company, one story. As an entrepreneur, I would like to build a tech consultancy in a rural area so that I can give real-world experience to new developers. We find that having some experience on your resume definitely helps you get the next job. The hard thing is the first job. Whether you're a graduate of a university or a boot camp, it doesn't matter. Finding the first job is the hardest. And in order to do that, we had to do some things. We had to educate the local businesses. As I kind of already mentioned, the local businesses were not using high-tech code. They weren't writing latest and greatest software. Some of them had a website, most of them didn't. But we start to partner with some of the local organizations and say, hey, look what we can do to help your business. And we gotta give them business guidance of how they could use software. We actually worked with one guy who he had owned the local grocery store, and he had sold it and started his next new business. And he said, hey guys, listen, I love what you're doing. However, last time I talked to a consultancy, they said the minimum amount to get started with any project will be $250,000. To get started? And okay, let's dig into that. And what is that actually giving you? Okay, probably not even remotely what you wanted anyway, so let's throw away the idea of that consultancy and let's start talking about what you actually need and how we can start seeing business value instead of just dollar signs that you're gonna be spending. We worked with a local t-shirt company. The group that makes all the t-shirts and hats for all of the school sports, they didn't have the capability to do that online. So instead, all of their competitors from all over the country and all over the world were beating them because they could, for a very inexpensive cost, get all of the work for the local schools. So we built them a way that they can do their sales online as well. So working with local businesses has been super successful. We didn't we didn't really know what to expect, whether or not we'd get any local business. But in order to build a tech community, we need more than just foreign employers employing our graduates. We needed people locally able to hire software developers. And we had to compete with offshore, right? As I pointed out earlier, Donald Trump said no more foreign workers. Okay, well, it's easy to say that, but the people don't exist to write the code. And oh, by the way, often when we would offshore a project, companies would do that because, not just because they were getting workers that were awesome, but because they were at less, the dollar value was, the dollar amount was less. They didn't have to pay as much for it. So we had to come up with a pricing model that worked as a competition for offshore developers, but then also be something that would be sustainable for our company and allow local businesses to buy our software. I've already kind of mentioned that you can't just do this alone. You can't have just, okay, we'll create coders, and then what? There has to be an entire ecosystem in the region to support having developers there. And so in order to build a tech hub, it takes more than coders. I know none of you are surprised by this.
All right, so Stuart, as a tech hub, I need technologists with varying levels of experience, not just beginners, so the beginners can grow.
Yes, so having a bunch of brand new programmers, that's kind of hard. You have to have some mentors. You have to have people there who can support all of these new software developers, help them to gain the skills that they need to advance their careers. So we built a mentoring app. We had our students build a mentoring app that allows people from all over the world who have experience in technology to find a mentee that they would want to work with, that maybe they have something in common with, that can help them grow their skills. As a bootcamp graduate, I'd like to build my academic credentials so that I can boost my career opportunities. So from the very beginning, we said, okay, university would be great. If Marv could have just gone off and gone to university, fantastic. Unfortunately, that costs quite a lot of money. And it takes 4 years before you can even get started, right? So we saw the bootcamp not as a replacement for university, not by any means. It's more like a step in the direction of your academic credential. So you could get a bootcamp certificate, and then perhaps as you're earning money, you can go on and get your degree, your 2-year degree, your 4-year degree. So as a bootcamp, I'd like to partner with established academic partners to build a stackable credential to lead to a degree. Degrees are really important to some companies. I don't think that that's going to change in the very near future. I think education will reform eventually, but we're not there yet. So I don't want to take the ability to have a degree away from people. So we wanted to say, well, what if you go through our boot camp and then that gives you some credits towards your degree if you decide to get something. And we partnered with a group called CCAC, the Community College of Allegheny County. This allowed students to come through their college into our boot camp and then add more classes to it, right? They can add their business classes. They can add some of their more computer science classes to their credential and graduate with something that employers are really impressed with. And we also partnered with other groups, Clarion University and the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education, in order to be able to say that this is part of something bigger. And we're not going to say that this worked, right? Like, we're so new. We're still so new. We have no idea how the graduates from those programs will come out, right? So if they get their boot camp certificate and then they can go on and get a job and work while they're in university, while they're finishing their degree, that's fantastic. That's very helpful. But we don't necessarily know yet when they graduate with their degree, will having the boot camp certificate in advance of that, will that be beneficial to them? We'd like to think so, but we're going to say we don't know yet. We also partner with high schools because as kids of coal miners and kids of coal miners and grandkids of coal miners and great-grandkids of coal miners, all we've ever heard is, you're going to graduate and you're going to go to the mine. That's what you do. That's the job you're going to take, and it's a fantastic paying job, so do it. Every one of those coal miners made the right decision by going into the mine. It sounds crazy, right? Like, you don't think that people are still going into the coal mine, but they are. People are graduating from high school with not really having an idea that they could do something else. So we wanted to partner at a younger age to be able to say, okay, well, I've come through school, I've had some experience in software, maybe that's a career path I'd like to take. So when I was graduating high school, I didn't have any software development classes, nothing. And so I thought, okay, well, yeah, but I'm old. But local schools still don't have anything. Well, they do now because they're partnering with us. So it's great to see young people who are getting excited from our region who are saying, no, I'm going to have the next great startup. I'm going to have the next great tech career. So as soon as you start having any kind of press whatsoever, which we got way too early, we had an idea that other people had already had, and we put ideas that other people were having together to build what we did. And we got a ton of press really quick. CNN picked up the story. I woke up one morning and I saw Marvin's face on CNN, which was crazy. Like, that is not normal. But the first time you get press, everybody says, okay, but does it scale? How are you going to teach all the coal miners to write software? I had a writer from the ACM contact me recently, and he asked, okay, what will it take to teach every coal miner to write software? And my response was, I don't know, what would it take to teach every software developer to mine coal? They didn't like that response. Apparently that was not the popular answer. But we did think that what we were doing could scale to a degree.
So, as a region impacted by the decline of the traditional industries, I'd like to create tech hubs so that as to diversify our economy.
Yeah, so when somebody asks, how are we going to teach every coal miner to write software? It just kind of makes you think, like, okay, and then what? We did that with coal. We depended on one thing, and it was coal, and then something bad happened. I don't expect anytime soon that programming is going away, but if your entire economy depends on it, it's not very good. So diversified economies is a really important thing to make a community work. We were contacted pretty quickly after the CNN article by West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. So he's working in DC, and I thought, probably just trying to get votes. I don't know very much about politics, but I didn't really have the expectation that a senator would ever call us. But his office called and said, you think you have a problem in Pennsylvania, southwestern Pennsylvania. We've heard you've done something really good there. We would love to have you come visit, just say hi. We're gonna do a job fair. Maybe just kind of give the idea that you could do this boot camp thing and it could change your career. And we did. We went and we were in a room with about 3,000 out-of-work coal miners in the same room. I think there are 600 seats in here, right? Something like that. So imagine times 5. All out-of-work people saying, I don't know how I'm going to feed my family once unemployment runs out. And you only get 6 months of unemployment. So we visited, and never did he ask us to vote for him. Never did he ask. We couldn't legally. We don't vote in the state of West Virginia. Never did he ask us what kind of politics we believed in. He just said, if you could come here, I will tear down any barriers that it would take. I promise you that we'll give you a state full of people who are really interested in what you're doing and are going to give you what you need to be successful. We bend over backwards for our people, and we think that this would be a good thing for our people. So we started partnering, and we quickly met a whole lot of other partners, the National Guard, the community college technical system. We met a group called Richwood Scientific, which is a guy who moved from LA to West Virginia and happened to be a programmer and said, hey, I can teach people JavaScript. Partnering with the senator, or both senators, that's both senators together over there. So both Republican and Democrat, we work with both of them, which is fantastic. And the Mountaineer Challenge Academy.
Yes. What the Mountaineer Challenge Academy is, basically it's a boot camp. Well, they're not, it's not for troubled kids, but it's for at-risk kids, and they run it in a boot camp style. It's like military style. They get up in the morning, 5 o'clock, do their running, then they're in studies all day. And these kids, 16 to 18, they'll get their high school diploma when they finish it. It's a 6-month in-house. They stay there. Everything's controlled. And we did the first one, 20 students or so. And the kids, they really loved learning the code. I mean, we didn't do the boot camp that we had, but we tried to give them the basics to get into to see if they'd like a career in tech. So it was a great time with the kids.
So we're partnering at all levels of the government, all levels of education. We have an ecosystem forming. And the General of the National Guard, his name's General Hoyer, he had a crazy idea. He says, well, if we're teaching people how to write code and we're taking them, they're living in these places that don't necessarily have access to Wi-Fi, what if we put these people in sort of a village and they could live together, they can code together, they can work and play in the same sort of area. And they gave us space in a town called Clendenin, West Virginia. Clendenin is an area that was not only extremely affected by the coal mining decline, but also a year ago they had a 100-year flood, which means it's a flood that is so bad that can only happen once every 100 years. The space that we're in is an old middle school. It was flooded till, was it 15 feet high of water?
Yes.
But they completely renovated the space and said, this is going to be where we start over. This is going to be where we start something cool. We're going to bring hope here in bringing a tech hub to Clendenin, West Virginia. So we're on a river, obviously. That was kind of the problem. But it's kind of also a great thing because now that the flood we're recovering from that, we can bring kayaks, and if we want to take a break from work, they're putting in a kayak drop for us, so you can just go out and maybe take a quick float down the river. So all of this together, we're seeing great impact in West Virginia. We're really excited about what's happened there, from a phone call 18 months ago to now we have an office in Clendenin, West Virginia, an office or a class in Beckley, West Virginia, where we will soon open an office, and we're going to be expanding south as well. So, I don't know, has Bloomberg been defied? I mean, we're on our 8th coding cohort. We've got 8 groups of kids. I call everybody a kid, I'm terrible. 8 groups of adult learners who have come through. Our 7th and 8th are about to graduate. So we would say that we've had some success. We do not define success by teaching every coal miner to write software. We define it by having some sort of economic impact in a region. So we think that Bloomberg is probably eating his words by this point, hopefully. And so we want to ask you, if we say that we do TDD and we start with something that is failing, and then we do something to make it pass, and then we refactor, will you help us to refactor our program? Will you help to refactor an economy that is impacting somebody important in your life? Maybe it's where you're currently living. Maybe it's where you grew up. Maybe it's you have a friend who grew up in a region. Think about the skills that you've got that you can give back.
Yeah. Even if you don't want to start a boot camp and teach people to code, maybe just an after school with the kids, or there's all these little things you can do that makes a big impact.
But maybe you do want to do this. Maybe you want to start your own boot camp. It is not nearly as horrible as it sounded, right? It sounds like it's going to be a whole lot of work, and it is. But really what you need is time, commitment, and will. You don't need a ton of money. We didn't have a ton of money. We bootstrapped it. After you start to give people some skills and just incrementally build it into something bigger and bigger, then things start to happen. Like we've recently gotten a grant from the Appalachian Regional Commission we partner in a grant for $1.5 million so that we can continue our training for free to students for the next 2 years. So because we've had small successes that have built on top of each other, it's allowing us to continue our mission to build tech hubs. So Nelson Mandela says, it always seems impossible until it's done. We're by no means done, but it's starting to feel less and less impossible. Every day that goes past, when we came with this idea of something that was just completely irrational and impossible, it's actually starting to look like it's a real thing. So don't let things that are impossible hold you back. And if you have the potential to do something to give back, whether it's writing code for not-for-profits or mentoring students or starting an after-school program or starting your own coding boot camp, we would love to help in any way that we can. So please feel free to reach out. Thank you. Okay, so we've got questions. What's the success rate? That's a great question. Our success rate is terrible because we want everybody to have the ability to join the program and have the ability to fail, right? If you're in a region where you don't know a single person who writes code for a living, and you are willing to give it a go to say, hey, I kind of want to know more about this, I don't want to say no to that. I want you to come and learn and learn any little bit, and it will change the way you think in the rest of your life. Even things like just learning to Google things. The most common answer to a question is Google it. And if you don't know how to Google, you're kind of at a really bad place. So less than 50% of the people who join actually graduate, which is, I think, incredibly awesome because that many more people get some exposure. But if you're a grant company and you're saying, hey, I've given a grant to you, I want success, I can see where other people might want to see higher numbers. We're going to push back on that as long as we can. Okay, who pays for all of this? Like I said, when we got started, it was really just not a lot of money, so we paid for it ourselves. It meant driving back and forth between Chicago and Pennsylvania on the weekends. So Friday after work, 5 o'clock, get in a car and drive 8 hours. That part wasn't fun, but really it doesn't cost that much to do it. And especially if you're doing it locally, then it's obviously much easier. But we have gotten grants since then, so now it's paid for by us. We're still funding parts of it. It's also funded by the federal and state and local governments. What obstacle to engaging the local community, other than customers or as programmers, surprised you most? Ooh, what obstacle surprised you most? This is, gosh, do I answer this for real? Can we cut the recording? We got started teaching free skills, giving people skills that would get them jobs, and we were served a cease and desist by the Pennsylvania Department of Education pretty quickly, saying, wait, those skills are taught at universities. Pay us this fee and you could become a university. And we're like, wait, we're not a university, we're not a school, that's not us. So realizing kind of the obstacles that have been put in place, I think, to protect people from things like for-profit universities that are going to take people's money and not give them the skills that they need. Those need to be regulated. But if we're not charging you anything and we're not promising you anything, and we all go into this with the agreement that you may learn something, you may not, then that big fee that would have come up front with that wouldn't have been good. We've sorted that, but that was, I think, the biggest obstacle. How do you fix the salary pricing issue compared to offshore workers? Well, we have a lot of people who are just learning, right? So what would you charge for a student? What would a student charge to build some piece of software? It's probably not as much as maybe somebody with 5 or 10 or 20 years experience. So the costs are kind of, by default, skewed lower. Other than that, we don't have to pay our employees $250 an hour, $200 an hour. We don't have to pay those rates because the cost of living isn't that high. So we pay something that's really good for the area, will give you a good life, will allow you to get your kids into the sports that they want to play and go to band and do all the cool things that they want to do. So I think our costs are lower than most companies. What's the duration of the boot camps? So it's a hard question because it's a staged approach. We start with the 2 weeks. Hey, get to know code. This is what code looks like. This is how code feels. You may or may not like it. 2 weeks. We have a conversation. Hey, do you still want to keep doing this? Is this for you? Are you loving it? Are you miserable when you go home? Is this something you can see yourself doing to make money? And then we go into a 16-week boot camp. The first 12 weeks are project-based, katas, and then the last few weeks are a community project. The community project, giving something back to the community, and actually having some code on your resume. Hey, I've worked with a client. You know, it's really easy to work with the same client all the time. If you're working with me as your client, and I want you to succeed, then it's much different than working with a client who wants them to succeed, right? Their goals are different. They interact different. So that takes about 4 weeks, and then we go into an apprenticeship. If all that goes well, then you can come into an apprenticeship, which could take 4 to 6 months. And then after that, you can come on as a full-time salaried employee. Your apprenticeships are paid as well. They're just contractor paid instead of salary paid. And then it can last forever. It just kind of depends. So our boot camp lasts forever. Any other questions? Cool. Thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate you guys waking up so early.